So, welcome everyone to this new series on Quantum Talk, and this series is called Anger Management. So, I don't know about you, Natanja, but I've recently had really an influx of clients and especially children that are struggling with anger issues. So, I thought this would be a good type of series to do because I think there is a bit of information and education that needs to take place on what anger is, how do I manage it, what do I do, how can others help me. So yeah, that's what I wanted to look at. So this is going to be about 9 episodes. And what you can expect is in episode 1, we're going to talk about understanding anger. Episode 2 is going to be all about the triggers of anger. Episode 3 is expressing anger. Episode 4, anger management techniques. So you're going to have to hang in with us till at least episode 4. Episode 5, anger in relationships. And that's usually why most people start looking for help, because when your anger becomes so all-consuming that it's starting to affect your interpersonal relationships, that's when it becomes a real issue. Anger and stress in episode 6. Then in the next one, anger in the workplace or in the ministry environment. Episode 8, anger and cultural differences. And episode 9, getting help for anger issues. So I'm really excited to start this series, and I want to base this series on James 1 verse 19 to 20. And that says, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." And that's so profound because all of us are on a journey of righteousness. And if we struggle with anger, we see the word of God saying that you're going to struggle producing godly righteousness. And we've got amazing keys just in these 2 verses already. Quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. So those are already 3 keys that you can start implementing in your life. Okay, so let's look at what is anger. Anger is an emotion that you experience based on something in your environment. So it's a stimulus that you expose to in your environment that creates the emotion of anger. So the natural emotional response to a perceived threat or injustice leads to anger. Okay, we'll break down anger a little bit. Natanja's going to break it down for us a little bit later in this podcast. But basically, it's when we feel insecure, when we feel unsafe, or when we feel that there is injustice taking place. And that usually leads to anger. And sometimes we're acting out of an old wound. So there can be an old wound of rejection or injustice that just hasn't healed yet. And someone says something or does something that they really don't mean in a negative way, but it just triggers that old wound and you react out of it. And then what's important to understand is that anger can also be transferred from person to person. It can be projected. So sometimes you can watch a very violent movie or something on the news where someone's really angry or upset. And it's kind of like you pick up on that frequency. It's kind of like a second-hand anger that you can also take on. What we need to understand is that anger is very complex. So anger can be mild irritation to intense fury. So literally, I'm irritated, leave me alone, to I'm going to strangle you. And anger is something that is triggered. So usually when our expectations are not met, and we can have expectations on how things are going to happen, how certain things are going to play out. We can have expectations of others, expectations of God even. You've got an expectation and that's not met. Then that's a trigger. It can also be triggered by a perceived threat to your own well-being or the well-being of a loved one. If you think of that mama bear type thing, there's nothing like a mom protecting her child, So if a mom feels like there's a threat to the well-being of her child, then she can react in anger. So how do we experience anger? So anger begins in the brain's limbic system, and that's the part of the brain that controls our emotional responses. And so what happens is that limbic system then activates the a sympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic nervous system is your fight, flight, or freeze response. So that immediately increases your heart rate, your blood pressure, your adrenals. And if you're constantly in that sympathetic nervous system state, there's a lot of other health issues that actually result because of that. So, if we talk of anger like this, I think many people have a very negative connotation to anger. And what we need to remember is that God gave you the ability to experience anger. So anger in itself is not really negative. It's what you do with the anger that becomes something negative, or that becomes sin. If we take an example of righteous anger, it would be Matthew 21, verse 12 to 13, where we see Jesus going into the temple and driving out the money changers. There was a righteous anger there. But most often, unfortunately, we don't suffer from righteous anger. We suffer from the harmful anger. And that comes when we don't express anger in an appropriate way, or when we express it excessively. Another example of righteous anger is, I don't know about you, Natanja, but like when I feel there's a spiritual attack and I do spiritual warfare, there's like this righteous anger against the enemy and what he's doing that I experience. We also see scriptural references of God getting angry, at things that the enemy does, or at people's transgressions and constant breaking of his law. So in Ephesians 4, verse 26, it says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger." So again, you see here, there's nothing wrong with getting angry. It's what you do with the anger that becomes sin, and that is what is wrong. And when it says, "Don't let the sun go down on your anger," the moment that we allow anger to fester in our hearts, it starts creating bitterness, resentment, hatred, vengefulness. So that's why deal with your anger as soon as possible. Try and resolve the situation in a healthy way. And we're going to look at some tips maybe in some of the other episodes, not in this one. But how do I deal with it? Now I'm angry, I'm upset with you. What do I do now so that it doesn't go over into sin? Colossians 3, verse 8 says, "But now you must put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and obscene talk from your mouth." And when I read this, the first one that's mentioned is anger. And I just saw this picture of a door opening to all of the other things. It's like anger, once it goes into sin, it opens the door for wrath, for malice, for slander, for obscene talk. Have you heard someone how they can talk and swear and use ugly words when they're angry? So can you see how anger is the door that all of these other ugly things enter into? So Natanja, do you want to tell us a little bit more about how uncontrolled anger actually leads to certain health and emotional issues?
Yes, well, I think it's first of all just important to mention again that your soul lives in your body. And so the reactions of your soul, which are emotions, your mind, your will, and your emotions, those reactions from your soul have an effect on your body. And if you only think of someone who gets angry, I just see that little red face emoji on WhatsApp, all red in the face. We all know that little red face emoji, that guy's angry. And that's what happens. And we even have sayings, that you will have a coronary, you're so angry, and that literally means that there will be some form of hot thing that happens to you because of the anger, or my blood is boiling. All of these expressions for this emotion of anger has such a physical connection to your body and your health. So let's look at some things that uncontrolled anger causes. So high blood pressure, hypertension, cardiovascular problems. The American Heart Association says that people with angry personalities, they may be at higher risk for heart disease and stroke. It causes digestive issues like indigestion, acid reflux, irritable bowel syndrome. It can cause mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and substance abuse, relationship issues. And that's such a common sense thing. If you are angry at everyone in your life the whole time, they're trying to help or trying to do something, and you lash out, or you're just vaguely irritated, the way you answer, the tone of voice that you use, it damages your relationships because no one wants to be around you because they're scared of what they will say and what will your reaction be. And I think it's also important to know that shame or that anger is not the end of the emotional turmoil that happens in your body. It leads to other emotions, and that can be a little bit dependent on the type of person that you are. You can either lash out in anger and then afterwards realize, oh my word, I overreacted so much now, and then you feel shame. Or you start abusing yourself with the fights. Your constant inner dialogue is conflict and anger towards others or yourself. So you're constantly abusing yourself emotionally. It can lead to guilt for your actions. And there is something that psychologists realize, that a lot of people have depression, but it doesn't look like normal depression. And they actually call it anger-induced depression. And it's because people swallow their anger. And they swallow their anger because they know, okay, I need to be a good person, or I need to be understanding. So they're the people pleasers, but they're still angry. They're just unable to say it. And it builds up inside of them. And I'm just thinking of a pressure cooker that blows all over. That's sort of what happens. But it goes hand in hand with depression. It's not an isolation. So just that's something that we need to know. And then the last thing for me, anger really causes a form of aggression that just bursts out of you, whether it is in the tone of your voice or physical aggression. Some people throw things, or that aggression, the root of that is anger. And so we need to also understand the little branches that grow out of this tree that is anger. But if you want to understand anger even better, we need to look at the roots of the tree. Where does anger come from? And it's important to know that anger is a secondary emotion, meaning something else always causes us to become angry. And more often than not, it's cover up for our emotions that are hurt, or our egos that are bruised. Maybe we are fearful or vulnerable. And that then, if it's undealt with, it turns into anger, and we then lash out at the person. And that happens so often when our expectations, like you said earlier, our expectations aren't met. And because someone's not meeting our expectations, we then feel abandoned or rejected, or our feelings are hurt. And then what do? We pick a fight with that person because we've become angry that they treated us this way. Another thing that can cause anger, that's the root of anger, is suppressing other emotions. Again, that bottleneck experience, or the pressure cooker that sort of just somewhere it flips its lid and it's just anger everywhere. And then a handy tip is to try and identify what the primary emotion is that is triggering you, and then you are acting out in anger, and rather deal with the root. We always say, rather deal with the root of the problem. And so another thing that I think it's important to notice, that the American Psychological Association says that anger can be a secondary emotion that is triggered by other emotions such as hurt, fear, frustration. In these cases, anger serves as a defense mechanism, helping people to cope with painful emotions and maintain a sense of control. And I'm just thinking, how many times do people say, I'm just an angry person, or this is my personality? But it actually is not. This is your body's way of protecting itself from emotional rejection or emotional hurt and pains and wounds. So you become so angry, everyone's sort of scared, so they don't even try to hurt you. It becomes a defense mechanism. So anger becomes this coping mechanism, and it becomes a way to manage the primary emotions. But if you address the primary emotions, like we said earlier, the roots of the tree, and the triggers that causes you to have this anger outburst, then you do not have to rely on anything to cope with. You do not rely on the anger to cope or to protect you anymore. So, Elzaan, this usually, like you said earlier, this starts in our childhood. This is an old wound that usually triggers. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yes, so what I believe is that we live in a society where we are teaching our children how to work smartphones and tablets and TVs and all of these things, but we're not spending time teaching them how to manage their emotions. I mean, that's not something that you hear parents saying, but that's something that's a cardinal piece of the growth that takes place for a child. Remember, children don't know anything about the world. They learn about the world and about people and how the world works and how to deal with relationships and stress and difficult things by watching their mom and their dad. So, because the parents are so broken and there are emotional wounds that haven't been dealt with, and they're using anger as a coping mechanism to deal with all of these primary emotions that they just don't want to deal with, we've got very angry, frustrated parents, and we live in stressful times. And that's what children are seeing. That's the example that they're getting. So, Natanja, you spoke about suppressing a lot of our emotions, and that actually leads to a bottleneck that very often can present as anger issues. And that's really where the academy and the quantum counseling comes in. Because either you need someone to help you identify all of those emotions and release them, or you need to learn how to find them yourself and release them. That's a great way to start this journey of anger management. And then also in the Quantum Soul course, there's a whole chapter or module that I spend on just children's emotions. And there's even a little children's emotions chart with pictures, because children don't always know what the name is of the feeling that they have. So if you could give them something practical like that chart that's got little pictures on, and they can point to something that they can identify with, it helps them. Then you can help them and say, okay, this is what you're feeling. Let's talk about why you're feeling like this. And you can start teaching your child emotional intelligence. So that's a big thing I think that's lacking in children's lives today. But as an adult, you may struggle with anger issues, and the roots may actually be in your childhood. So, the type of childhood has a profound impact on how we express and manage our emotions as adults. So, if you came out of a house where you weren't encouraged to talk about your day, to talk about how you're feeling, if your mom didn't cover you and protect you and nourish you and help you when you were maybe bullied, and there wasn't that emotional intelligence that was taught and imparted into your childhood, you may struggle to express and manage your emotions in a healthy way. But it goes even further. If there was abuse in the childhood, and abuse is such a wide term. It can be anything from just being an absent parent to being someone that is verbally abusive without even realizing it. A lot of people think that they are encouraging their children, but they're actually very negative, and they put a lot of pressure on children to perform. And that can be a form of abuse. So I'm not talking about just children that really have the severe abuse, like physical abuse and sexual abuse. That could also be it. But children that experience abuse, any form of abuse, can feel powerless in their childhood. Remember, you are so dependent on your parents. You've got no control. You've got no power. So it makes a child feel very powerless. And then that, as you grow and develop, there's actually a part of the child that stays arrested in development. So there's a part of you that stays that small child that experienced that form of abuse. And that child feels powerless. And as an adult, that is often expressed as frustration and anger. So if you've got anger issues as an adult, when someone comes to do sessions with me and they say they've got anger issues, I always want to go back as far as possible. Where's this coming from? Children that are belittled. So you are either belittled by a family member, a brother, a sister, a mom, a dad, or bullied at school. Like Natanja said, anger becomes your defense mechanism. It becomes your shield. So instead of being bullied, I'm going to bully you. So before you can hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. And that becomes a form of self-protection. And then as an adult, this person needs to learn how to express and process their emotions in a healthy way. And that's also something that we teach at the academy. As you learn to identify how to find these emotions that are stuck in the body and how to release it. There's also a whole module that we spend on healthy ways to process and express your emotions. So as we finish off this podcast today, you may ask yourself, sure, well, I'm not sure. Do I have anger issues? So let's see. If you've got frequent arguments and conflict with others, you may have anger issues. And remember, it is our default to blame others, unfortunately. It started with Adam and Eve. What did Adam do? It's the wife you gave. What did Eve do? It's the serpent. So it's ingrained into us. So just answer this question in an honest way. Don't think everyone out there is against me. Everyone hates me. No, everyone's always false accusing me. So it's not my fault, but I'm always in conflict. So if there's a lot of conflict in your life, chances are good that you have anger issues. Another thing could be physical symptoms, increased heartbeats, blood pressure issues, sweating, muscle spasms. All of those things can be indicative of trapped anger in the body and anger issues. Not having self-control and losing your temper easily. And like we said earlier, there's actually a part of anger that goes into substance abuse. So the self-control would be linked to that, because that part of you that's angry, that doesn't feel safe, that's insecure, that feels there's been injustice, wants to be nurtured, wants to feel safe. So what you naturally would do is something that makes me feel better. And unfortunately, that is often something that's linked to abuse. Taking prescription medication, drugs, alcohol, food is a big one, sugar addiction, sex, pornography. So there's a lot of things that you would do then to make you feel better. And that the root of that addiction could be anger and a temper problem. And then a lot of people are really honest and they'll say, this has got such a profound impact on my daily life, on my relationships, on my job. I can't even drive to the shop and back without getting road rage. So I can see this is an issue in my life. So I don't think this podcast is just for people that can answer all of these questions and say, yes, I definitely got an anger problem. I think this is actually a good series to do for anyone that's a human being, because I think all of us have experienced anger in the past and all of us will experience anger in the future. So these may be valuable tips and information on how to manage that going forward. Natanja, did you want to say anything else before we finish?
No, I'm really looking forward to completing this course and just seeing where this takes us. And we both hope that this helps you in your journey to better relationships and self-healing.
Amen. Well, we'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Please feel free to leave a comment. If you like this video, click the like button. Remember to subscribe to our channel and don't forget to ring the bell.